Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another series of the ECI webinars. This one we are very, very excited about. It is over navigating change. I know people are going to be coming in. We are right at noon, so we're going to get started. We've got a lot of fun stuff to cover today to really help our manufacturing organizations with that scary word of change, and especially around ERP implementation.
Okay. There we go. Sorry.
Perfect. So my name is Tim Watkins. I'm the Vice President of Integrated Solutions here for the manufacturing division, working with our sales, marketing, BDR, product management, and development as well to really try to find and build out the right solutions for our customers to join us. Been with the company for 6 years now, but worked in manufacturing for many years, both as a sales rep, selling multiple solutions, as well as a manufacturing sales rep, working on those shop floors and bribing all my production managers to get my orders out first. Joining me are Lisa Armstrong and Jennifer Lipschultz. Lisa, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Armstrong, and I am the Senior Director of Global Learning and Development here at ECI. I've really helped our organization with managing internal change and sponsored a lot of trainings for our leaders and our employees within ECI. I've also been a guest speaker at our Connect conference for the past several years, really helping our customers understand the importance of change management.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Jennifer, to you.
And my name is Jennifer Lipschultz. I've been with ECI for nearly 5 years. I have an extensive background in project management. My particular focus at ECI is on our merger and acquisition integration. Whenever we acquire a new company, my responsibility is to help bring them seamlessly into the ECI fold. So in that experience of working with mergers and acquisitions, I've had, of course, a lot of experience with change management, and I'm very happy to share with you today some of that background and experience, which is very applicable as well to learning new software systems and introducing those to your teams.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Lisa. Very excited about this conversation, but I think it's really a good starting point to understand why is this important? Why is change management important for ERP implementations? And to me, in my experience on the sales side, on the development side, it's really about getting a company ready for whatever you're purchasing, an ECI product, we hope, or otherwise. What are the types of conversations you're having internally? What is the buy-in that you're building? What should you expect your employees, your leaders to go through when they are really trying to adopt or looking at adopting some change? Anytime you're implementing a new software, especially like an ERP, getting people to buy in is absolutely critical for the success and the adoption of that product. The hundreds of projects that I've been involved with when it comes to the ERP side, the vast majority of those that really did the work of understanding their employees' reasons for not being excited. I think that's a good way of putting it. What is stopping them from adopting? What is stopping them from really jumping in with 2 feet saying, this is going to help me, even though it might be a little bit of a change or a big change, depending on their role? The ones that do that beforehand, I have found to be infinitely more successful and a much smoother process, and really getting to what all change matters about: ROI, value, benefit to the company. The quicker you can do that change, get that adoption, the quicker you'll be able to actually start getting an ROI, revenue back in your pockets for the investment of resources, time, blood, sweat, tears, hopes, and dreams that you put into these big changes. So traditionally, an implementation roadmap has different segments and different start and stopping points: talking, discovery and planning, design phase, development, testing, usually at a user level, deployment, and then finally you're live, it's a happy day, and your support and updates. One thing that I find critical around this change management topic, and I know Lisa and Jennifer are going to talk a lot about this in the next couple of slides, change management isn't just something that you do before the project starts. Change management isn't just something in the discovery and planning phase, or even in the purchase phase. Change management is throughout this entire process from A to Z, and really trying to understand where your people are at in their adoption of that change. The acceptance of that change is something that our project teams at an individual ERP level, they really try to drive and understand what's stopping you from jumping in with 2 feet, what's stopping you from doing the homework and things that you need to do to be able to adopt this and use this and leverage this technology for the betterment of your company. So I'm very excited about the concept of change management, not just on the front end, but all the way through this cycle. We can go to the next slide, but I wanted to say one kind of housekeeping thing. All of our attendees are muted, but please, if you have questions, open up in the chat, type it in. I'm going to be monitoring that along with Lauren Williams on our technical team to be able to make sure that we're answering all your questions. So if you have questions, please put it in there. We want to hear from you, so it's not just us talking at you the whole time. So let's take it away.
So when you introduce a change to your employees, such as a new ERP or any other type of software application, what are your employees experiencing as they are adapting to that change? And what I'm showing here is an emotional change or roller coaster to a certain extent that your employees are going to go through, regardless of what type of change you might be asking them to adapt to. And so first, there is some shock or surprise. And one of the things that I think people are often surprised about in this very initial stage of change is even if they knew a change is coming, such as a new ERP system, and they feel like they might be prepared for it mentally and emotionally, all of a sudden the day is here when they're going to be having to start supporting the change, and they might get surprised that they actually are feeling a little uncertain about going forward with this change. Denial is the next step. Usually people are like, I can't believe this is happening to me. And they're feeling then anger and resistance because they're not in control of these changes. It's happening, they might feel to them instead of with them. At the bottom of the change, it's listed here as depression, but I often use the word resignation. And it's the point in time when people start to realize, okay, I have no control over this change, but it's still going to happen. And so they start to realize the impacts and the consequences that this change is going to have, how their work process are going to change, what are the new login screens and the user interfaces and possibly the experiences that your customers are going to be facing because you're using this new software. And then they start to get a little curious. They start to think, well, if I can't do anything about this change and it is going to happen, well, what are some ways that I can adapt to this change? And they start to realize, ideally, that there are some benefits that actually come along with this change. They start to get a little enthusiastic and hopeful, and ultimately that leads to commitment. So how do you take your employees through, how do you take your employees through this change? There's a lot of change management, organizational change theories that are out in the business space. And the particular one that I'm going to be sharing with you, or Lisa and I are going to be sharing with you today, I have particularly appreciated because it allows you and talks to how you can affect change at the individual level versus just at the organizational level. So how do you do that? Well, there is a change management model called ADKAR, which you can see from the top of the slide here, stands for a series of steps that you would go through to introduce this change to each and every employee that's affected by the change. It starts with awareness, followed by desire, then knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And Lisa and I will be going into each of these steps to give you some more information and context about each one. But what's really important about this particular slide and this graphic here is what we're trying to depict is the people side of change, which is what the ADKAR acronym represents along the top, goes hand in hand with organizational change or project management tasks that you would likely have put in place to implement a new piece of software. And very typically you start with what is your business need? your concept and design, implementation, and post-implementation. And so this is the important piece here in the light bulb moment, if you will, and what we're about to share with you is how you can layer in these steps of ADKAR on top of your ERP or software implementation project to actually get the people to change along with the organization and adapt to your new software application.
And I love this ADKAR model because different people change at different speeds and they start at different points in that graph that we were just looking at. So somebody that is excited about the change, they were maybe driving it, part of the group that bought it might have a very different starting point than somebody's just coming out into a meeting saying, what is this thing? What are you talking about? We have a new ERP. What are you talking about? We have a new process that we're dealing with. And that's one of my favorite things about ADKAR because it can adapt and mold to where each individual is at in that change journey.
Yep. Thanks for sharing that, Tim. And I think the reason we're so adamant about talking about the people side of change today is because that's typically where changes fail or succeed. It's the people, right? We can have the best idea, the best strategy, but if I can't get people behind it, it's not going to go anywhere. So if we look at the very first step in the ADKAR model, it's awareness. And oftentimes people think of awareness is, let me tell people what's changing. That's very important. We do need to explain the what, but to really get buy-in, we have to start with the why. And there's layers of this, right? So I need to be able to communicate to my team, why are we changing? Why are we moving from doing everything manual for the last 20 years to implementing an ERP? Why now? Why is this so critical for our business? I have to be able to paint that picture of the future, the forward-looking state. This is why this is so critical that we do this today. And I still need to talk about the what. But if we look at the next slide, I want you to think about the why before the what. So what typically happens is people say, here's what we're going to do, and here's how I want you to do it. And then we kind of go, okay, everybody's informed, they're good to go. And we know that's not true, right? That's not going to work. The what and the why speak to two different parts of the brain. So if we just focus on the what, we're talking to the logical part of the brain, we're completely ignoring the emotional part of the brain. So the why really taps into the emotional part of the brain. Why is this important? Why is this going to help us be more successful? Why does this set us up for a better future? I'm getting people to think differently when I start with the why and then give them the what. And this is very contradictory to how a lot of people think about communication. We usually start with the what, because it's easy, right? Here's what we're going to do. Here's how you're going to do it. But I really would encourage you, start with the why and don't stop with one time. It takes reinforcement. We have to continuously be painting that picture. Here's why it's critical and here's why now.
Next step is desire. And this is the hardest part of the ADKAR process. And the reason is because the other steps, the change manager is in control to a certain extent of delivering information or content to progress employees through each of those phases. But desire, while there is some amount of influence that management, particularly an individual's direct manager, has over helping to reframe perhaps the ideas that are swimming in someone's mind about a change, ultimately it's up to each employee to make a choice that they are choosing to adopt this change. So as listed at the bottom of this slide here, the best person to help an employee through choosing to follow a change is their manager. And how would they do that? There's many different avenues to pursue. And perhaps in another webinar, we could dive into some more deeper content. But for today, what we chose to share with you is a situation, if you will. If you can picture an employee struggling with a particular change and having a discussion with their manager about it. And usually what's happening in the absence of information, people make up stories in their own minds about what is support why a change is happening and what its impact is going to be. And so the suggestion here is where the direct manager can drive that conversation is to really understand, based on their relationship with that employee, understand what their motivators are that would help that employee understand what's in it for them personally. How can they benefit out of this change? And so the first place to start is to understand and just have a discussion on what is it that is truly known? What facts do we know about this change? And on that conversation, you'll start to unearth some of the assumptions that the employee is making about this change. They're assuming that they're going to have to work more hours in order to learn this computer application. They're assuming that maybe some parts of the software aren't going to be working properly, and you can understand and what their concerns are, and then identify, moving into the next step, what it is that we do definitively know about this change and what it is we can expect. And it's important here to be honest and truthful. Some things you may not know what the consequences are going to be immediately, but now after having this conversation, you have a list of some of the concerns and some areas that you can go and address and try and get answers. And then you can have the conversation about how it directly impacts us. Once you identify the facts and you identify what it is that we do and do not know and have an action plan to go and get some of those answers, then you can understand and digest, well, what are going to be the benefits and the positives and the negatives of how this change is going to impact each and every person. And the idea here is by having an honest and open conversation with your employees, and you're helping them to process the information about how this change directly impacts them and move them along that change curve that I shared before to understand and get some curiosity and some acceptance of what this change might bring to them.
So this touches on something that I think is a large boulder for a lot of companies that are looking at bringing in an ERP and changing. And one of those large boulders is data collection. I now have my shop floor workers collecting data, and now all of a sudden it's the end of the world as we know it. And I have to spend a minute every time or 30 seconds every time I do something. I have to input it into the system, and that can be a very big thing for a lot of the shop floor workers. They push back on it. They beat their head against the wall. But I think reframing it with this to say, what is the benefit of that? Do you know that the accounting team is spending 8 hours a week manually filling out all of this information that you're taking a second or 2 or 10 to be able to enter? And that's going to give us the information to do your job better, to plan your job better, to schedule better, so that we're not scheduling 60 hours in a 40-hour work week. The ability to frame that, yes, I'm asking you to do something you're not doing now, but here's what you get in the end of it. Here's the benefit that you get from it, rather than the natural human response of, it's only taking more from me. I have to do more. I have to do more. And I have blinders on to the positives, to the benefits, either to me, to the organization, or to just another department that's going to make their day a heck of a lot easier.
Tim, that's a nice lead into this. And this also, this slide also builds on some earlier comments that Lisa made. When you're trying to explain the what's in it for me, most people seem to gravitate towards trying to explain the benefits of a change based on data, statistics, logic, and metrics. And that is important information. It provides a business case, if you will, for the change, but those are all usually geared towards how the change benefits the organization. And as Lisa previously said, when you talk about the why, you're focusing on the emotional roots within someone's mind about why they want to adopt a change. And if you, in conjunction with, and I'm not saying ignore the data and statistics and logic and metrics, but if in addition to that, you paint a picture of the future, you paint a picture of how customer service is going to go up, even if someone on the shop floor has to take off their glove and push a button every 30 seconds in order to show that a piece of equipment is moving down the manufacturing line, how at the end of the day, it's going to produce happier customers and perhaps bigger bonus checks at the end of the day, then that's a vision that you can paint and motivate people emotionally to want to buy into that change.
All right, so the K of ADKAR is knowledge. And I will tell you now, a common mistake that people make is we jump to knowledge before we do A and D. And if you can think about an experience you've had, I know I've been in this situation before where I've been assigned some training or told to take some training, but I don't know why I'm taking it. And I have no idea how it's going to make me better. So I'm not really super motivated to do it. I'm probably going to sit on it, or I'm going to kind of do it, but not really engage with it. So a huge watch out here is not to jump to the training. Don't just jump to, okay, let's learn how to use this ERP. Like Tim said earlier, I have to do the work on the front end of creating awareness and tapping into desire and motivation so that when I am telling people they're going to have to take some training, they understand why it's so critical and they're more enthusiastic about it versus feeling like it's being forced upon them. So a couple things here that are important to note, especially when it comes to an ERP system. Someone on the shop floor is going to use it very differently than someone in accounting. So if I'm thinking about my training plan and how am I going to set my team up for success, I have to think about their individual roles. How is each person going to be using the software? I can't just do a blanket training. It's not going to be sufficient enough because there's going to be gaps depending on how I need to use the software. So it's really important that we think about what does every team or every individual need to set them up for success. One thing I would encourage you to do as you are moving down the path of implementing new software is to take a look at your current employee base and what skills and knowledge do they already have. For example, is there somebody that works on your team that has already implemented an ERP, maybe even ECI software somewhere else, and they could be a huge resource? Do you have someone on your team that's very technologically savvy and embraces new challenges with technology that you could really use to be an advocate and help get other people excited about it as well? Or am I really going to need to rely on outside resources to help us get the training and support that we need? So thinking about those things ahead of time is really critical. You'll obviously get support from ECI or whatever software you're implementing. You're going to get support from the company, but also what resources do you have right under your own right at your own fingertips that you may be able to leverage internally as well?
And a lot of times companies will use a train the trainer type model where the ERP company is working with a smaller group, maybe department heads. And a lot of companies, I think, make the mistake of not choosing the right skill set to be the trainer of the end users. So I think that's a step that I think more companies need to really slow down, is like, is Tim the right person to be delivering this message? Maybe he had reservations. Maybe he isn't as quick to adopt change. Maybe he isn't as quick, as I'm bashing myself constantly. Maybe he isn't able to communicate things very clearly, and yet we're having him train all of the trainees. So that's something I think, especially when you get into this knowledge section, how are you delivering this? How are you prioritizing this as a project? If I'm giving people 60 hours a week and then putting 2 hours of training on it, how much is that training going to get? How am I opening up my team schedule? How am I making this a priority to match the why that I put at the very beginning of the conversation? Are my actions and prioritizing and opening this up for the employees matching my why, or is it a fire drill just to get it done?
Yep. It's a great segue to the next slide, Tim. So thank you for that commentary. So the next part of the model is ability. And this is exactly what Tim was talking about. Am I making it easy for people to actually use the new training that they've received? So ability is very different than knowledge. There's a lot of stuff all of us know we've been trained on or we have the background, but we don't necessarily use every single piece of that knowledge or training every day. So when we think about ability, our job as leaders within the organization is to really make it easy for people to do it the new way. The biggest concern here to watch out for is, am I letting people continue to do it the old way rather than embrace the new way? Because if I make it easy to fall back into, well, let's do it all on a spreadsheet or let's do it all on a piece of paper instead of within the software, people will take the path of least resistance. It's called the law of ease. Our natural tendency is, I'm going to do whatever creates the least resistance for me. So to really establish people jumping in and embracing the training that you've given them, we've got to reinforce the new way is the way. And not only that, but I have to be giving positive feedback when I see my team doing it well. Oftentimes what trips people up here is they're trying to use the training they've received, they're trying to use the ERP the way they've been trained, but they're not getting any feedback. They're not being told, hey, you're doing it well, or hey, we could be using it more effectively. And when people don't get reinforcement, especially positive reinforcement, they'll start to question themselves, and then it's very easy to fall back into the old way. So it's really critical with ability that we make it easy to embrace the training they've received and to use it, but also that we're giving positive reinforcement and corrective coaching where necessary. Which kind of leads us into this next slide of the pyramid. So when we think about what makes new skills stick, only 10% is formal training. So you're going to get formal training from ECI around the ERP, or from whatever company you're partnering with about any software. You're going to get some formal training. That's only 10% of what's actually going to make that training, that new skill stick. 20% is what we just talked about. Your coaching, your feedback, you're correcting if we're not going down the right path, but you're also rewarding and recognizing when people are doing it well. And then 70% of what makes new skills stick is people actually having to do it on the job. As we said earlier, there's a lot of stuff all of us have been trained on, but if I don't use it every day, guess what? I'm going to forget it. It's going to go by the wayside. So the most critical piece of people actually adopting that training and making it stick is encouraging them to use it. And even if it's rough and a little bumpy at first, the more experience we have, the stronger we build our confidence in our ability to do it effectively.
So I had a question on that when it comes to the experience, because the first impressions, the first time I do it, it's brand new. It might be bumpy. How as a coaching and feedback, because that's really what can reiterate it and kind of refocus it. How, from a coaching and feedback perspective, can we help offset some of that maybe bumpy first impression that somebody got the first time that they got it? I wanted to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
Yeah, one thing I'll share on that, Tim, is we call it celebrating the small wins. I think that's probably a common phrase that a lot of us have heard. I'm not going to go from never using an ERP to being a master in a matter of days, right? That's not realistic. But if I'm trying and we're seeing small wins, maybe I do one thing really well. As a manager or a leader, am I recognizing those small wins and giving people confidence to try a little bit more, use the software a little bit more? Let's try it over here. I think celebrating those small wins, and not just with the individual, but making those small wins known across the team, builds confidence, and it builds enthusiasm and desire as well. So that would be one thing I would say is really critical.
I love that, the small wins. I've heard some people say that an ERP system is like buying a boat. The two best days of getting a boat are buying it and selling it, right? The two best days of getting an ERP are buying it and going live, right? There's got to be small victories along that path, that journey, that change odyssey that some organizations find them on. You have to celebrate the little things. It can't just be, I bought it, I'm going live, are the only two good things that ever happened with it. There has to be these small wins along the way. I love that, Lisa.
I'd like to add to Lisa's answer, and Tim, provide my own thoughts on this. A big part of ability is experimentation. And I think a key thing, particularly with an ERP, and many of you on the call here you're very dependent on the success of your ERP in order to satisfy your customers. It's scary to move to a new ERP system because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to go back to your old system unless you were doing it as Lisa described on Excel and paper, in which case you probably are very excited about trying to move to a more automated system. What I'm trying to get at is building into your project plan a pilot, or possibly even several pilots. And if you're in a situation where you have multiple manufacturing lines, It's very easy to carve out one of those lines to possibly be a pilot for your new ERP while you're keeping the existing ERP running on your other manufacturing lines. Or if you don't have that ability, maybe you can develop a plan where you try to get ahead of orders and have a bit of an inventory in stock and carve out, say, a Friday afternoon to do a pilot. And what goes along with that, to answer your question about coaching and feedback, whenever you do plan to have your pilot or a series of pilots to build and continuously learn and get to that point of go live to get people comfortable with the new software, is to either have an implementation consultant, or as Lisa mentioned, some experts that you might have, a train the trainer, a super user who is going to act as your coach and feedback, and jot down what are some things that went really well with this pilot, what are some areas that we need to improve, go back and reevaluate your processes and how the ERP system is configured to enable you to more effectively use it and build up the confidence that your shop floor workers have with using the ERP.
I'm fascinated by that, because when I think of somebody going through the changing and going through the training and all of that for a change, I'm seeing them alone in an office. I'm seeing them alone at their desk, and I was fascinated by the pilot program in groups. And I think building out groups, keeping it positive, keeping the spirits up, celebrating the small wins, and putting people together to go through that chaining, to go through, hey, what worked for you on this? I was struggling with this. That's really where you start to kind of see that curve on the adoption and go from I can do it to I want to do it.
And doing a pilot's a little bit less scary too, because people realize, your customers' deliveries are not on the line. This is still a test and a trial run. And so if there are mistakes that happen, they're expected. It's a pilot. And you have still an opportunity to course correct and make things as seamless as possible for your actual go live date. The last step in ADKAR is reinforcement. And some of these elements Lisa touched on a little bit, but one thing that I really wanted to touch on here with reinforcement is metrics. And certainly, well, number one, taking away the old way of being able to run your business is a very easy way by default. You're reinforcing that they have to use the new system or the new software because the old way doesn't exist anymore. But especially if the old way does exist, you want to decide how you're going to measure the success of your ERP or software implementation. And whether this is a good example or not, at least you can kind of work with me on this. Let's just say one of the bottlenecks that you're trying to work on by implementing the new ERP system is you're trying to be able to place orders more quickly, more just in time to your suppliers who need to provide the raw materials that you need for your factory line. And so perhaps your overall metric of how long it takes for you to place a purchase order or with a supplier is 30 minutes. And that is a metric that you expect to be improved by implementing the new ERP. And so if you take those measures, but let's say initially it's 40 minutes to place the purchase order, and you might get really discouraged and think, gosh, this was not what we expected. We paid all this money and put all this effort into putting in this new ERP system, and we didn't get the results we expected. Well, that is actually a cause for, I'd say, somewhat of a celebration, because Thomas Edison once said, I would prefer 1,000 failures over a single success because I learn a lot more out of the failures. And so my point I'm trying to make here is look at where perhaps your initial metrics are not meeting the goals that you were desiring to achieve and root cause those. And maybe it's just as simple as going up a learning curve. And once the person who's placing your purchase orders gets more comfortable with the system, maybe the time to place those purchase orders will go down to 20 minutes. Or maybe there's a real impediment that you've discovered with the ERP system that you can now address. So decide how you're going to measure success, take those measurements, and then publish those measurements, because everybody on your shop floor, they're going to intuitively know if the new ERP system is better or worse. And if you own up to the areas where maybe things aren't going initially as well as you expected, but then you show that you're taking steps to make improvements on those, your team is, I think, naturally going to recognize that with your leadership that you are really trying to make things fundamentally better and are living up to the expectations and the vision that you painted at the beginning for why we're doing this ERP implementation change in the first place.
And Jennifer, I would just add to that real quick. Think of reinforcement too as a constant reinforcement of this ADKAR model. Once is not enough, right? Saying the why once is not enough. Building desire one time is not enough. Training one time and never coming back to any training is not enough. I have to be continuously looking at, based on where we're at as an organization, do I need to go back and reinforce the why again? Has the why changed a little bit? Maybe some people started with really strong desire and I'm kind of seeing that wane. Do we need to tap into motivation again? We did initial training, but we're only using 25% of the software. Is more training required? So I would just also encourage you to look at reinforcement as, how do I continue to reinforce this model continuously? It's not a one and done, it's an ongoing process to ensure that we're all moving in the right direction.
And I think those metrics, depending on where you're at in the organization, can get wide and broad to very, very focused and narrow, especially if you're looking at a specific department or even an individual that you're really trying to move along this change cycle. What's the one thing that matters to them? One of the things that I always asked to people in my discovery process as a sales rep is pretty much, what's the worst part about your job? What's the thing that you look forward to the least every Monday morning? If I can fix that, that can really help change your mindset and make you a champion of the change rather than a resistor of that change. So really, even at an individual level, I mean, what sucks about your day? What's the worst thing that's happened to you today that you're just like, oh gosh, this is on my task list. I do not want to do this today. This is going to be pushed tomorrow. We all have a couple. What are those? And how can this change proactively address that, make that a little bit better, and just solve that one little thing, then the next little thing, then the next little thing. So.
All right, so I really like this curve because it kind of takes us from where we started to kind of where we're putting this all together. So Jennifer went through the change curve early on in the presentation. That's what you see there with the little emojis. And then we just went through ADKAR, which is what you see across the screen in the red bar. So let's layer these two things together. So as we think about announcing, we're implementing an ERP, there's going to be shock, right? We know people are going to be shocked. What do I need to do? I need to give the why. Start with the why, paint a picture, give the vision so that people understand why it's critical we're doing this and why now. It's very natural. People are going to have denial, they're going to have pushback, they're probably going to be frustrated, they might be very resistant. I've got to build desire during this time. Tapping into the what's in it for me, just like Tim said. What's the worst part of your day? If we can fix that, is that going to build a little bit of motivation? Absolutely. So I'm tapping into desire to help people get out of that kind of funk of the curve and get up into experimentation. And I can't experiment unless I have knowledge and training. I've got to know something for me to experiment with the new tool. So if I do a good job of training and getting people the knowledge they need, they're going to continue to experiment. If I make it hard to do the old way and easier to do the new way, I'm increasing their confidence and I'm going to start to move them into acceptance. And then, as Jennifer said, if I'm measuring and reinforcing what's working and making sure we're celebrating that across the organization, I'm going to continue to get better and better commitment. So that's how these two things layer together. And on the next slide, it's one of my favorite slides, and I would encourage you to do this with your team, especially people that are going to be using the ERP regularly. This is an example of what Tim said earlier. Everybody's going to move at different paces, and they're going to perhaps need a little bit longer in some of the phases, depending on their past experiences. So for example, if I look at Kavita at the top, she learned about the change very early, and she moved through awareness, desire, and knowledge relatively quickly. but she really got stuck in the ability phase. This might tell me that for Kavita, maybe she wasn't getting coaching and feedback that she needed. Maybe it was still available to do it the old way, so she was falling back into old habits. There could have been any number of things going on there, but that's where she got stuck. If I look at Chen, the third one down, he got stuck in the knowledge phase. So what I would assume here is maybe Chen was someone that is very, very maybe behind when it comes to technological knowledge. Maybe he's never worked with software. He was very intimidated by it, didn't know where to start. So he's going to need a little bit more training and perhaps a little bit more hand-holding because he doesn't have any experience. If I look at Alana, she found out about the change much later, but she also worked through the phases very quickly. This might tell me that either the change did not impact her very much, or perhaps she's somebody who's implemented an ERP before. She totally sees the value in it. She's excited about it. She's getting other people excited about it. And she moved through that curve very, very quickly. So obviously plotting this on a piece of paper is a lot of work, but even if you just mentally kind of take a snapshot of your team and say, where is everybody at? And if I see that the majority of my team is stuck in desire, that tells me, okay, we've got to tap into these motivators. I've got to figure out how is this going to help them in their day-to-day. I haven't done a good enough job there. Or if everybody's really stuck in awareness, maybe I've talked about the what, but I haven't really reinforced the why, and I've got to go back and do a better job of that. So it can really help us as leaders identify what do we need to provide across the organization, but also on an individual level.
So to summarize, this is a sheet that Lisa and I typically suggest. We give a very similar training to our managers inside ECI, that they consider printing this out and putting it in a close by area in their working space to remind them frequently of what ADKAR really stands for and what the model is. And what we like about this in a very succinct manner, not only does it reiterate what ADKAR stands for, but provides very short definitions of each of the phases, and it provides some triggers for building awareness or desire, knowledge, etc. Answering the why for awareness, the what's in it for me for desire, etc. And this last column is kind of building on Lisa's last points. And when you're doing a scan of your employees and trying to figure out where in the ADKAR process they are, you can understand if an employee is saying, I understand why we're doing this change, you know that they are past the awareness phase. If they are saying, I am able to implement this change, that means that they're in the ability phase. So the last column are kind of some quick quips, if you will, that you can listen for from your team and help you understand and diagnose where they are in the change process.
And Jennifer, one quick point on that too, the desire phase, one thing just to call out, you'll notice it says, I have decided to, not I'm in love with this idea. Not everybody's going to love the change, and it's not our goal to get everybody to love the change. Our goal is to get them to decide to try. So I think that's really key. You'll have some people that are excited and they've wanted this for years, and you're going to have some that aren't in love with the idea. But can we show them enough benefit to where they say, okay, I'm not in love with the idea, but I'm going to try. So that's, I think, an important differentiator there.
So we'll open it up for Q&A, but a couple of things that I wanted to mention. This presentation is available in the handouts in the control panel, so you are welcome to go ahead and download it. And there will be a recording that will be sent afterwards. So with that, Lauren or Tim, do we have questions in the chat to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. We have about 10 to 15 questions available. This is by no means meaning that the questions are closed. If you do have additional questions that come up as we're answering, feel free to still submit them. And if we don't get to it today, somebody will follow up and start answering those questions for you. So the first one that we got is how do we actually implement the pilot? Is there an option for that through ECI, Tim?
Yeah, so one of those is the test go live periods that we have with both of our go forward products on the discrete manufacturing side with JotBoss Squared and M1. So that's something that you can absolutely talk to your project manager about. That's also a key part of our user acceptance testing, a UAT, where we've done the process mapping. Now we're actually putting things into the software that follow the unique nature of your organization, who needs visibility to what, when, how, and why, and then what happens if then. That user acceptance testing is a great kind of easy pilot, kind of pilot, sort of pilot, but really having a consultant either come on site or do it virtually, where you sit into a conference room and say, let's talk about A to B to C to D, and really go through that pilot program, walking through some dummy orders, seeing what happens when it goes wrong. I think a lot of implementations assume that everything's always going to go great. As small to medium manufacturing and business owners, you know that is not the reality of the situations. So I always recommend, let's try to break it. Let's try to see what happens when something goes wrong, because something does go wrong probably more often than anybody wants to admit. So talk to your project managers about that. That's absolutely something that we can and can't build into the project to provide that type of resource for you guys.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is, a lot of the objections we hear is around disruptions that it's an unknown for them. So how can they manage the talk track around implementation potentially disrupting production?
So that's again goes back to the point, and I'll let Lisa and Jennifer hop into this as well, because I think it touches on that. This is, as a owner, what are the priorities for the organization? Of course, you have a business to run. You have products to get out. You have contracts and obligations to fulfill. But how are you structuring the priorities in terms of making sure that you are taking a longer term look? Again, that why for the organization. Understanding that you still have a day-to-day to do is part of our implementation ethos. We know that you're not going to turn your business off, not accept any orders for a couple of months, and focus 100% of your time on an implementation. Honestly, I recommend that. That's probably the best way to implement something that changes every part of your business. But by golly, nobody has accepted that yet, of just stop your company for a couple of months and focus 100% on an ERP implementation. No idea why. Nobody has said yes to that. How are you prioritizing communicating what I need? The ability and the resources that you have during an implementation to go to that implementation are gonna hem and haw. They're gonna ebb and flow. Making sure that you're communicating that to your project managers, making sure that you can communicate, hey, I've got 3 massive rush orders that I got to get out the door, or the lights aren't on to be able to do an implementation. Our project managers and our implementation team are like, you're absolutely right. We'll talk in 2 weeks. So understanding from a priority standpoint where you need to be focused on, but that it all comes really back to that why. Jennifer, Lisa, anything to add on that?
If it were me, and I'm putting on my project management hat now instead of my change management hat, and the question makes me think of a risk mitigation plan. And if I were faced with putting in an ERP and concerns that there was going to be disruption to production, I would get the group of experts together and say, okay, let's brainstorm. What are all the places where an ERP implementation can break down? What are some of our key measures of success that could be negatively impacted by this? And one of the examples I gave earlier when I talked about the pilot was perhaps building up some inventory of finished goods so that you can still get some orders out the door while you're doing your pilot and experimenting with putting in go live for the ERP. Perhaps you build up some inventory of your raw materials. Perhaps you build up overtime allowances and some funding for that. So there's a lot of different ways, I think, if people proactively think about what are the potential risks that could happen to the business as a result of flipping that switch and going live, and you come up with some tactics that you can take to reduce the impact to your business as a result of disruptions by putting in a new ERP, then you'll have a cushion to be able to absorb some of the likely things that Tim mentioned that will happen as a result of trying something new.
Alrighty. This next one, I'm actually bumping in priority. It just came in, but we hear this all of the time, Tim, around failed implementations and what to do the next go round. And we have a lot of customer success stories around this very topic. So the question is, we have previously implemented an ERP, and by most accounts, it's considered a failure. What recommendations would you have regarding a second go round? Treating it as a project in itself seems to be the best route.
That's absolutely critical, but I'd start even before that. What's your why? What's your why? What are you going to get out of this project, and how are you prioritizing that, communicating that, going through the ADKAR model? Yes. But as a sales rep, it's the first question I ask, why are we talking today? What are you looking to achieve from this type of project? If it's not worth it, why are you doing it? And that's a reason why a lot of these things fail, is you're trying to get ahead of the curve. You're trying to bring out a new ERP because you think you need one, because you're at that point. To me, every organization has that pivot point of when they buy an ERP or not. And it's when they're tired of having more data entry, more manual reports, and more meetings to be able to get visibility to the things that they need to see to run their business with confidence. An ERP can consolidate that and help mitigate those visibility concerns. A lot of times, it might be okay to just hire another person for data entry and schedule another meeting, everybody's favorite. So were you ready as an organization? What is your why? And then really creating as a project with project champions and project managers. Successful organizations that I see, it's not just one person. It's not just the owner who doesn't have time to do it, by the way, managing a project of the implementation of their ERP. You're involved in that as the owner, yes, but who are the 1 to 2 to 3 people that, from a bandwidth perspective and a skill set and ability perspective, you trust to really champion this project to fulfillment? And that has to be the goal. So what's your why? Are you truly ready for it? And that project team that you can trust, that has the bandwidth to make this that priority that you need it to be.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, Tim. Think about now I'm going to go kind of to the psychology piece here. It didn't go well, so now we've had a failed implementation under our belts. People are telling themselves a story, right? We can't do this, it's not going to work, it's going to fail. So we have to separate fact from story, because I promise you there's some storytelling going on. So I think another thing to do is to really take a look and say, what are the facts about why it didn't go well before? To Tim's point, did we not prioritize it? Did we not get the support we needed? Lay that out. What were the facts versus what stories are we telling ourselves? Because people can run rampant with stories and then we're going to get stuck, right? It's just going to be this wheel and we're stuck, versus let's look at the facts, and given the facts, what do we want to proactively do different this time that can help us make this a successful implementation?
That's a great point. What is your ownership of the blame for yourself? It's not always the ERP company. It's not always the implementation. It's not always outside circumstances. Yeah, you might have bought the wrong product, but what is your level of control of blame? What is your level of the ownership of why that failed? It's not zero. It's not. With any failed implementation, it's not 0% for either party. There always has to be some level of shared ownership of that failure.
All right, perfect. And we have a time for a couple more, so I'm going to start prioritizing some of these. The next one that we have is, how do we address resistance to change from employees that are comfortable with how they work today within existing processes?
So this speaks to some content we didn't have time to share today, but there's something called the 5 C's of change. And one of those 5 C's is comfort. And maybe an analogy off the top of my head is, if someone is used to going to the same Starbucks to get their coffee every morning, and now that Starbucks closes down. And now they have to go and build relationships with the barista at another coffee shop down the street. And there's, so they're going to be missing that level of comfort for a period of time. And so going back to when I was talking about desire and a manager having conversations with their direct reports, you'd have to diagnose that comfort is an area that they are concerned about, and that you then have to come up with strategies for how you can make them more comfortable with the new software. And I have a whole bunch of materials on that, which I can provide at a later date through you, Lauren. But it's definitely one of the areas that is typically a resistant, and there's lots of materials that are available to address that.
Yeah,
and I
that's
think
something that we hear all the time. I've got an employee that's been with us for 30 years, 20 years, 10 years. They do it the same way. They're not going to want to change. From a sales perspective, one of the things that I always try to resonate with is, as an owner, maybe it's the finance department, maybe it's the engineering department, it's an individual department that maybe is resisting that because they do things the way that they do it. As an owner of an organization, you're really now giving the keys of the kingdom and control of the future of the entire organization to that one person, that one department, that one group. How do you take that back and say, this is my company, this is my project, this is what we need for the greater good of the entire company, not just your department? So personalizing that. Yeah, the way that you do it works for you, but it has impactors here, 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 and here, and it's wasting this much time, and I can't do this, and I can't get this. Without that, this isn't working. Yes, it works for you and what you need in a very insular, isolated event, but let's take a look outside of your purview. Let's remove your blinders. Let's look at the entire waterfall rather than just your little spots on the river. That's something that I've tried to do with a lot of engagements to some success.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add to that is just go back to that law of ease concept as well that we talked about, inability. You are going to have people that want to keep doing it the same way, right? That's pretty much a guarantee. Those folks do exist within organizations, and they're gonna dig their heels in. I've got to make it easier to do the new way than the old way if I want them to change, because guess what? They will always go back to, but I know this, it's easier if it's available. So slowly, and maybe you don't pull the whole Band-Aid off, or maybe you pull part of the Band-Aid off. I don't know what a good analogy is there, but maybe you just take away the old way in small chunks, not all at once, but make it harder and harder to do the old way and easier to do the new way. And then it goes back to that pyramid. 70% of adopting a change is experimenting with it, and now they have to get their hands dirty and actually start working with it. So I think that law of ease really comes into play there as well.
Awesome. Well, that is all the time we have for questions. Tim, would you mind closing us out and letting everybody know where they can find us, and if they want to talk more about change management, who they need to reach out to?
Absolutely. Lisa, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us and really carrying the water for change management. This is a topic that we get a lot with our prospects and with our ECI customers as well, of really trying to adopt this. So I absolutely appreciate you putting the time and the energy into this conversation for ECI's customers and prospects. You can find us at ECIsolutions.com. We have many ways to reach out to the sales teams here. Be happy to send my information, will be part of this as well. Happy to talk to you individually about what products and what features and functions that we have to be able to align with the change that you need to enact in your organization. And then we'll definitely be sending you the recording of this, as Jennifer mentioned, as well as the handouts and some additional information to come of some of the items that we spoke about. But thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your Thursday afternoon.
Thank you.